and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. The webinar will begin shortly. We are allowing time for last-minute dialers to join the event. Again, thank you for your patience. We will begin shortly. Hello and welcome to More Money for More Good, 3 steps to help nonprofits fundraise. My name is Brandy and I will be in the background answering any WebEx technical questions. If you experience technical difficulties joining the WebEx session, please dial 1-866-229-3239. Please note that as an attendee, you are part of a larger audience today. However, due to privacy concerns, the attendee list is not displayed. Today's presentation will be in listen-only mode. We will be holding a Q&A session at the conclusion of today's presentation. You may ask an online question anytime throughout the presentation today by simply clicking on the question mark icon located on the floating toolbar at the top of your screen. Please type in your question and then click Submit. Please keep the send to default to all panelists. With that, we invite you to sit back, relax, and enjoy today's presentation. I would now like to introduce your moderator for today, Lindsay Nichols. Lindsay, you now have the floor.
Thanks so much. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the webinar about our new guidebook for nonprofits titled More Money for More Good. Thanks so much for being with us. As mentioned, I'm Lindsay Nichols. I'm the GuideStar Communications Director, and I'm the project manager of the Money for Good work here at GuideStar. I just have a few housekeeping items before we begin. First, we're live tweeting during today's presentation using the hashtag #MoneyForGood, and that's money, F-O-R, good, all together. You'll see it at the bottom of the presentation, so we'd love for you to join us there. Secondly, we're happy to take questions from all of you during the presentation. Submit them when you're ready. You can do that using the question feature on the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, or you can also send it via Twitter. And we'll ask as many questions of our presenters as we can at the end. And if we don't get to all of them, we'll post more answers on our Trust blog, and that website is trust.guidestar.org. And finally, we will be sending all of you an email with a link to this presentation and the recording in a couple of days. So now I'm really happy to introduce the authors of our new guidebook. Bob Ottenhoff just stepped down as president and CEO of GuideStar and is now the president of the Center for Disaster Philanthropy. Bob has 25 years of management experience, including public broadcasting and high-tech companies, and he was 9 years as chief operating officer of PBS. Ulrich is the director of advisory services at Hope Consulting and the lead on the Money for Good project for his company. Greg helped develop both the qualitative and quantitative research, oversaw the analytics, and authored the main report, which can be found on his site at hopeconsulting.us. Greg brings over 10 years of strategy consulting experience to Hope Consulting, including as principal with Maricon Associates, managing the firm's 30-person West Coast audience. So we first wanted to get to know you all a little better. Greg, if you don't mind advancing it to the next slide. We have 3 poll questions. We're going to ask this, and then we're going to keep going ahead. So if you could, take a few seconds on the right-hand side of your screen, tell us who you are, whether you're a nonprofit professional, foundation program officer, philanthropy advisor, or other. Let us know if you've heard of this Money for Good research before, and we'd love to know if you've downloaded our free guidebook. So Bob, I think you're all set to take it away.
All right, so this story begins with GuideStar's inception 15 years or so ago. We had a very bold mission to revolutionize philanthropy and nonprofit practice with information. And we believed that armed with better information about nonprofits, donors would make better and more confident decisions and thereby give more dollars. And nonprofit organizations armed with better data could become more effective and more efficient and thereby increase their impact. But when we started, this was really before the internet and really before people began thinking about data to help them make better decisions. The internet came along, new technologies were developed, people began to use the internet for all sorts of reasons, including helping them make better decisions about their donations. And then, so we rolled along merrily for a decade or so, and then we found a piece of research, Money for Good research by Hope Consulting, that really gave us pause. Do people really care about information? And GuideStar, the first piece of information was the one on the left side here. Only about 1/3 of donors actually do research. And even more shocking, at best, maybe 5% of those, according to this piece of research, actually try to find the best nonprofit organization when they make a donation. So this was shocking news to us, troubling, and so we tracked down the folks that put this study together, Money for Good, from Hope Consulting to try to learn more about what they had found out. And based on that research, we teamed up to do another round of research called Money for Good 2. You can see the results, or you can see the tests we use for both of these studies. In Money for Good 1, we looked at 4,000 affluent Americans. In the second round of studies, we expanded that to 6,500 or more individual donors, advisors, and grant makers. And we also began to really dig down into what do they want? What do they really want when it comes to information and the format and the way this information is distributed to them? So we're going to share some of those results with you today. And we've organized this presentation into 3 big buckets of activity: how donors, advisors, and foundation grant makers behave and research nonprofits today. Secondly, what these groups want in terms of information. And then finally, what nonprofits can do based on this information to improve their fundraising and their own operations.
So So this is Greg. I'm going to take it over a little, from here and talk about some of the findings under the first banner around sort of how people behave today, and after that we'll go into what we found about what people want, and then I'll turn it back to Bob to talk about is sort of what the steps we think nonprofits should take based on this, and the tips we have to help you improve fundraising and your effectiveness. So some of the questions that came up in our original round of research and things we were looking to find out was, is it really true that donors are only researching a third of donations? That's something we found in our first Money for Good research, and we wanted to test in Money for Good 2 if that was the case using some different ways of defining research and looking at it. What we found was, yes, it is true. About a third of donations are researched. When we looked a little bit deeper on this, and I'll have a few slides that back this up, we found some interesting things. First, we find that 20% of people really research predominantly. They're about 1 out of every 5 donors really takes nonprofit research somewhat seriously and does some research for just about every donation they make. Another 30% do it occasionally. In the right circumstances, they might do some research. And about 50% of them have really no interest. Some of them we might be able to persuade in the future, but for them it's much more of an emotional process where looking for more information on nonprofit isn't really what's driving their decision making. We also found that research varies significantly in a few dimensions. One, it varies based on the type of donation. If it's a first time or repeat donation, if it was recommended by someone that, by a close friend or family member, or if it's to a new organization that someone may have heard of and wanted to know if they should donate to. And within cause area, we found specific areas like international causes and international disaster relief get researched about twice as often as things like giving to an alma mater or giving to a religious institution. So pretty stark differences across cause areas, and I'll show a little bit of that in a minute. In addition to individual donors, we also looked at foundations and advisors. So we wanted to broaden the scope from just individual donors to look at those that advise donors and to look at foundation grant makers. And what we find out is those two groups research almost all recommendations or grants that they make. They have a very different behavior set than do individual donors. So depending on the audience that you're reaching out to, the desire to consume information is going to be rather different. And we also want to know today, not what they want, but today, what information do people use and where do they get it? And we find that people are really looking at really basic information on an organization, its mission, what it's doing, sometimes the overhead ratio, and they're getting that information from the nonprofit itself. They're not going to third-party sites. Before I move on, one question to Bob. Based on your experience at GuideStar and your 10 years here, when we came out with, what were your reactions when we saw some of this? I know the first round we saw that only a third of people researched and maybe 5% research to find the best organization was surprising. But what about the fact that foundations advisors research a lot more and have different desires, and that people get a lot of information from the nonprofit and looking for basic information?
Yeah, Greg, so I think one of the things that struck me when I saw this research is it's dangerous to think about donors as sort of a unified group. Donors come with different values and priorities, we've come to realize, but they also come with different research habits. So what you just told us is that 20% are going to do a lot of research. They're going to really dig into it. But then there's another group of 30% that sometimes do it, sometimes don't. And then we found that foundations and advisors research almost all the time. So this presents both some opportunities and challenges, I think, to GuideStar and also to all nonprofits, is how do you present the data so that you're responding effectively to those different kinds of groups. So it helped GuideStar to kind of think through that we needed to make our website a little more nuanced so that people could get the data they were looking for in an easy way, easily acceptable way. But for those who weren't interested in it, we needed to make sure we weren't providing or presenting barriers that gave them information that they didn't want or weren't looking for. So I think that's the really big takeaway from this is different market segments want different kinds of data, and they want it presented in different ways. And it emphasizes the thought again that you really need to know who are your users and why are they coming to your site or to your organization, and getting to know how they're using the data that you provide to them.
Thanks, Bob. I'm going to go through, Lindsay had mentioned up front that the slides for this webinar are going to be sent out within, I think, the next 48 hours. So I'm not going to go into all the detail in the next slides, but I wanted to give a brief overview to hit on some of the high points and so you understand some of the context when you receive this. So this page I mentioned the difference between how individuals, advisors, and foundations do research. And what this shows is while individual donors, while almost everybody cares, only about a third research and 5% compares, we saw earlier, we see the research behaviors for advisors and foundations go up significantly there in the middle column, and many more of them are doing so to find the quote-unquote best organization. And as I also mentioned that 20% of donors are sort of the core researchers, and another 30% do it occasionally. This slide sort of breaks down the buckets of donors from based on how much they research and talks a little bit about their behaviors. Next, we have, I had also mentioned that in some instances we see a lot more research, and the left-hand side of this graphic I think is telling, this will not be the case in what you get, but apparently somehow in the webinar one of the column headings or the row headings has left. But on the left-hand side we see a third of donations are researched overall, but the 41% represents donations that aren't quote-unquote brand name recognition nonprofit. So people research significantly more when it's not a nonprofit that they've heard of before. And then the 58% represents those that aren't brand name or personally recommended by a friend or family member. So again, based on the organization, how it's coming to an individual, their research behaviors differ quite dramatically. And finally, before I go into what people want, this slide talks about the cause areas that I mentioned. So if you look again at the left-hand side, you see that while the average likelihood of researching is about 33%, on the bottom, when people are giving to an alma mater or religious institution, that's 18 or 20% of the time people are actually looking for more information, whereas for international disaster relief and other international causes, a far majority of donations are researched. And this is based on actual behavior in the past. So people are researching significantly more in some cause areas relative to others. So that gives us a sense of how people are behaving today, what information they're using, when they're doing research. But again, as Bob mentioned up front, what we wanted to find out in this research was not just sort of how are people acting today, but what are they looking for? What are some of their unmet needs? And the first one I want to talk about is what information they want. What are they, not just what are they using, but what are their stated desires, and how well is that information meeting their needs? And to talk about this, I want to go to this next slide. What donors want is a full picture of a nonprofit organization, and they want better information on effectiveness and impact than they have today. And the way I wanted to walk this through is looking at sort of both, and I'm going to see if I can draw here, looking at both sides of this. So first, if the information is important or not important here on the y-axis. And then secondly, how well that information is meeting their needs on the x-axis. So it could be the case that information is very important, but they have access to it today, and that's very different from information that's very important, but where they don't have access to it today or it's not meeting their needs. And when we look at what actually influences decision-making and behaviors, it's these unmet needs that are really critical to unearth. So the first thing we found is endorsements from third parties and comparative information across organizations is not information that's very important to donors. And this page, by the way, well, is based on the data that the individual donors that answered the survey presented. The same directional image that holds true for the 725 foundation grant makers and the 875 advisors to donors that also answered the survey. So across donors, foundation grant makers, and those that advise individual donors, we see the same message. The second is there's a lot of information that donors care deeply about where they feel they have good information today. This is on the financials and the legitimacy of an organization, basic information on the cause, and basic information on the organization itself, such as the board, the mission, some of its activities. This is very important information. It shows up top of the list for all donors, but it's not. But they also say that I don't have a difficult time getting to that information from the nonprofit or a third-party site. The one piece of information that showed up as being one of the most important, actually the second most important piece of information, but also an area where donors struggled to get what they wanted, was around impact and effectiveness. So what we see is donors are looking for a full picture of an organization. They want all this information in here that's important to them, but it's really the effectiveness information that's the big unmet need. So they want the full picture, but they really care about impact and effectiveness. The next question we asked is sort of how do they want this information presented to them, and we tested a variety of different presentation formats. This was a little bit more directed at the sort of third-party intermediaries like a GuideStar or great nonprofits or a philanthropedia that's providing information or evaluation on organizations so they can understand how they should best present information. But I think the findings are telling for nonprofits as well. Of the 6 formats we provided, the one that won was consumer reports, or a mocked-up version of consumer reports. And that scored notably better than sort of the simple star ratings that we had, that are pretty commonplace today. And the reason is people, again, are really looking for the full picture of an organization, and a format like consumer reports that provides, if you're looking for vacuum cleaners, it will rate them on, how noisy they are, how well they are on carpets, how well they are on bare floors. So you can sort of understand how these different products meet your specific needs. And because charitable giving is so personal, people really liked a format that didn't, quote-unquote, tell them what to do, but provided them information in a simple, easy, and transparent format that allowed them to make the decision themselves or feel like they were still in charge. In terms of where they want to get it, this is interesting. While we found nonprofits today are where people get their information, and this chart here talks about where people get their information today, and you can see nonprofit website, nonprofit solicitation, presentations, events at nonprofits, and someone at a nonprofit. All the orange bars are sources directly provided by the nonprofit itself. That's where people are getting their information today. When we look to the future, it was actually sort of third parties that people had a lot of interest in. The issue is they have no awareness of these today. So the idea of a third-party site that collected information on organizations like a GuideStar was very appealing, or the idea that an organization like Consumer Reports would get into evaluating nonprofits was very appealing. And there's a desire to use these sources for a one-stop shop to get information on nonprofits, even if they aren't well known amongst the donating public today. And then the final question was, will they act differently? And at the end of the day, that's what we really care about. Is people will say a lot of things, but what we really care about is their behavior. And before I get into sort of the answer on this, one other thing that we're engaged in right now are a series of market tests on a variety of different platforms to test if we change the format in which we provide information, if we change the amount of information that we're providing, is it actually motivating behaviors? If we put different information out in nonprofit solicitations, do the solicitations that highlight the impact of an organization get a better response rate than the solicitations that don't? We don't have the results in from all the tests, but those that we have done thus far, mostly on some of the intermediary portals. And what we do see is that when we're providing more information, be it on the GuideStar site, on Charity Navigator's site, or Network for Good, and when we're providing more information about that gives people insight into impact, we're seeing people take more actions, click more often on the Donate Now link, spend more time on the page, click to find more information. In general, more signs of engagement when we're providing them a little bit more transparency and a little bit more information, which we view as positive signals. The test we have coming up will help us understand exactly if it's moving money or not. But where we came to in our study, and we test this a variety of ways that go beyond just stated behavior, we feel that about 5% of dollars, or about $15 billion, is available to be moved. So of the $300 billion that's given annually by individuals and by foundations and by corporations, through the analysis we did here, we found that about 5% of that is willing to move. That's some people will look at that and call it low because 5% is such a small number. Other people feel 15 billion is optimistic. Our goal was not to be pessimistic or optimistic, just realistic, based on what we saw as the stated loyalty and of people to organizations today, and what we saw about their interest in other information, and a few different tests that we did through our quantitative research to suss this out. So we feel that there is money to be moved by starting to talk a little bit more about impact, present the information that people are looking for, and to do so in a way that communicates the right information and connects with the donors themselves. And Bob is going to talk about that a little bit more in a minute. But first, a couple other sort of summary questions between Bob and I here. So Bob, I'll hand it back over to you.
So Greg, I imagine some of our listeners today might think that what we've been presenting is a little in contradiction to one another. GuideStar started with the notion that donors are rational, analytical beings. A lot of your research starts to say, hey, not so fast. They may want some data, but they also don't necessarily do a lot of research. So help us conclude here. When we go back to our organizations and to our websites, should we be thinking about donors as rational, analytical beings or totally emotional beings that only occasionally do research?
Thanks. And, you know, ultimately, this is a question that we get a lot, so we've sort of jumped the gun and put it directly into the presentation. What we find is that there's not this sort of, it's a false dichotomy. Donors aren't rational, donors aren't emotional. They're a mix of both. If you had to give a winner to one of those two, you would, they're more emotional than rational, at least the vast majority of them are. But that's not to say that they're not looking for information, that they don't want to understand the impact of their money. And what we find is what people are really looking for is to give to organizations that are aligned in their cause area of interest, that are legitimate, but then they want to know that their money is actually having an impact. Not just where it's going and how much of it is going to a program versus an overhead, but actually what's happening. What's the impact of the $100 I gave, or the $20 I gave, or the $1,000 I gave? What's been able to be accomplished? What's the impact that this organization's having? And that's their unmet need for information, and that's what they're looking for. And providing them that sense is, I don't think, in counter to being emotional. Indeed, understand that you had a great impact with the money you donated can trigger a very positive emotional response. So Bob, a question for you. So a lot of this, we started off on the premise, and you talked about this a little bit, that or on an earlier slide, that, okay, so GuideStar started with the thought that donors are rational, then our original round of research said they don't research very often. So we did this follow-up, and some of the things in the follow-up were sort of positive to GuideStar about that people want a full picture of an organization. So can you talk a little bit again about, you know, did you have it right the whole time, or what are some of the things you changed or are thinking about changing based on this research?
Yeah, so I guess we had some right, and some we learned we needed to change on. And I think the place I would start is by just reminding everybody about the power of the internet and how that has changed the world and is beginning, I'd say only now beginning to change the world of philanthropy. People now go to the internet to do their research on whatever the subject happens to be, whether it's buying a plane ticket or buying a consumer product or just learning more about a subject. And so it's not surprising that they would be using the internet to learn more about nonprofits and helping them make decisions about their charitable giving. And so over the last decade, we've seen just an enormous change in how people are using GuideStar data and how they're using that GuideStar data to drive their decision making. And so I think we've had to learn that donors are expecting more. 10 years ago, transparency and accountability were sort of new concepts, and was a struggle at first. Today, donors expect that to happen. They expect an organization to be transparent. They expect it to be accountable, to fully give a picture of what an organization is doing and how it's spending its money. But donors are changing as well, and they now understand that giving money isn't enough, that they really need to know or have some assurance that the money is being well spent. I think that's why there was this initial interest in overhead ratios, because it represented that concern among donors to do a better job, to do the right thing. But donors are now beginning to understand that overhead ratios are really a simplistic and often harmful statistic, and they really need to dig in more to impact and effectiveness. And so, you know, as the donors are changing, fueled by the power of the internet, I think we've had to change as well in terms of what we collect and how we present it.
Terrific. So the next, I'm getting back to my slides here. The next question we have is around, you know, what can nonprofits do with this information? And I'm going to turn that back over to Bob. I know that a lot of you, 44% based on the earlier poll results, have downloaded the More Money for More Good guidebook, which is terrific, and about 90% represent nonprofits. So what we wanted to do now is talk a little bit about what we put in that guidebook, not just on the research, but about what people can actually, and what nonprofits can actually do. And I'll pass that off to Bob to talk about our 3 steps of collect, communicate, and connect.
Sure. So let's start with collect. What can you do in the way you collect information? And before I do that,
yeah, you want to do? Should we do this quick poll?
Yeah, let me just ask these 4 questions. Question number 1: have you heard of the GuideStar Exchange program? Yes or no? This is a way for you to display your data about your nonprofit. 2: do you have an updated GuideStar Exchange profile? This is the profile that is displayed on the GuideStar website and then made available to other, maybe another 50 or so sites. Have you heard of Charting Impact, our project with the Better Business Bureau and independent sector? And then finally, have you heard of Great Nonprofits? If you could just quickly answer each of those, yes or no, we'd appreciate that to get some feedback from all of you. And while you're doing that, let me start with the first area here of what you can do, and that's about collecting. First thing we urge you to do is to focus on the impact of your organization and the unmet needs that you're addressing, and try to give this some front and center space on your website and in your handouts. Show how well you are achieving your goals. As we mentioned in this report, this is the thing that is uppermost on a growing number of donors' interests these days. What do you do and what kind of impact are you making? A simple way to get started is by filling out a report called Charting Your Impact. And this is the project we did in partnership with the Better Business Bureau and independent sector. And it's 5 simple but very profound questions that will bring you and your donors clarity on your approach to the work that you're doing. It's a great way for you to start with your senior management team, to share with your board, maybe take a time at a board meeting to answer these 5 questions, and then ultimately to share with your stakeholders to see if they have the same impression about your impact as you do. So that's called Charting Impact, and it's available on the GuideStar site and is easily downloadable. A third is to update your GuideStar Exchange profile. This is a way for you to tell the story of your organization, and we now present it in a very simple consumer reports-like format. It's easy to understand. And then as a part of that GuideStar Exchange profile, we've began to partner with an organization called Great Nonprofits. And what Great Nonprofits is trying to do is gather the wisdom of the crowds. You've heard that phrase before. In this case, what we're trying to do is learn from donors, from volunteers, and then from program recipients of your organization. What do they think about you? Why did the donors give money to you? How are program recipients or volunteers feeling about their experience? And this becomes one more data point, not the sole data point about your organization, but one more way to measure the effectiveness of the work you're doing. Second bucket of activity that we want to talk about is all about communicate. So after you've collected that information, communicating it to your stakeholders and to prospective donors becomes key. And here again, we urge you to lead with impact and competence. Donors today want to do the right thing. They want to know that you're an effective organization that's not only using your resources efficiently, but is really making a difference. And that gets back to that passion and rational conversation that Greg and I were having a minute ago. Donors are passionate first, and because they're so passionate, they want to know that you're really making a difference. And so they're going to look for you for information about impact and competence. We also recommend that you highlight third-party accolades. And by this, we have in mind Philanthropedia, which is gathering the wisdom of experts, Great Nonprofits that we talked about before, Charity Navigator. All of these are ways for third-party endorsements that, again, help the prospective donor get an understanding that you're a serious organization committed to transparency and accountability and doing the very best that you can. And then finally, we urge you to update your GuideStar Exchange profile. We like to keep these no more than 18 months old, and you can. It's a free service that you can link to directly from our site, and then we go on to share that information with foundations, with donor-advised funds, with giving portals, a whole variety of different sites that are using GuideStar data.
Thanks, Bob. And I'll come in and talk about Connect. And before I do, the other thing to hit on some of these points around collect and communicate is we feel that they're not only useful for outreach to donors per se, but they're also very useful for nonprofits themselves. So charting impact, potentially the biggest benefit you'll have from that is getting your leadership team and the board aligned around your mission, what you're doing and what you're not doing in terms of your activities. And so these we feel are useful both to help nonprofits themselves as well as to communicate effectively with those from whom you're trying to raise money. The final C, or the final step, is connect. So once you've collected information, the right information, and communicated it appropriately, how do you actually connect with your donors? And the first thing we have in here is around knowing your donors. And while we didn't have a slide on this here, in the guidebook we do talk about 6 different types of donors. There are donors that we call the high impact segment that really care about giving to the quote-unquote best performing nonprofits, but others that are motivated primarily from a religious means, others that we call repayers that give predominantly to organizations that may have addressed a cause that have afflicted themselves or a loved one, or to an alma mater. Casual givers, those that give to their local communities, and others. But the point here is that donors aren't all alike, and that you're not necessarily going to be the right organization to appeal to every single donor in America. So knowing what types of donors fit with your mission and your type of organization is important, and segmenting the audience appropriately based on who you are and what you're doing. And we talk about that a little bit more in the guidebook. The second is targeting your message. So different donors have different motivations and therefore are going to be attracted by different messages and different appeals. So knowing your donors and then targeting your marketing collateral appropriately is critical. And the final connect is around following up. One of the great elements of fundraising is donors are loyal. And while getting money is incredibly difficult and is getting more difficult each year, one of the good parts is once you have a donor, the majority do stay with organizations year on year and continue to give. And it's actually one of the most loyal elements of individual spending we see. One of the keys to making people loyal and creating that long-term relationship is following up with them and telling them the impact that they had through their donation to your organization, and not confusing these follow-ups around thanking them and telling them the impact they did with pleas for more money. People recognize that they're going to be asked, and that's part of the game. But where we found people getting frustrated was being solicited a little bit too often and having those solicitations confused with thank yous. So following up and talking about the impact of your giving is important. And in the guidebook, we actually talk about some case examples and some organizations that do some of these tips very well. And one that I think brings a lot of these together is Charity Water. If you're not familiar with Charity Water's website, I recommend you check out charitywater.org. They just do a nice job of getting the right information in front of people, communicating it in a very simple way, and following up to tell people the impact they had with their donation. And they can actually tie donations to specific geographic areas and specific wells that were able to be built with those charitable dollars, so they can really create a nice story for the donor. And it's very emotional, but it's also rooted in the impact of the dollars that a donor is giving. So it really weaves together all these rather nicely. So again, we do have this guidebook, More Money for More Good. It takes the research we found through both Money for Good 1 and Money for Good 2 and over 10,000 surveys now of donors and others, puts it in more of a narrative and hopefully accessible format, gives you case studies, and then highlights these 10 tips in a little bit more detail. You can get this document for free at GuideStar.org/moneyforgood. Again, we'll send out these slides, so if you don't copy this down appropriately, you can find in the slides that will come to you in the next day or two. And for any questions, you can email Lindsay. She was the one that introduced this webinar at lnichols@guidestar.org. So thank you from Bob, myself, and Lindsay. Here's our contact information, and I'll leave you with the website where you can get the guidebook. You can also get the PowerPoints for the full research if you want to see more of the data behind it. That's all available there, as well as infographics and some other information. So please see GuideStar.org/moneyforgood. And I think at this point I will turn it back over to so we can do a little Q&A, and then anything we don't finish up with, Bob and I will answer online in the Trust blog.
Excellent. Thank you to you both. And I just want to say we've been receiving some really great feedback in the chat, so we appreciate that from all of you. So we have a few questions, and I'll just rattle them off, and Bob and Greg, you can decide who's the best person to answer. The first question is specifically about the research. It says we see that 20% are core researchers, 30% are occasional, but what is the percentage of individual donors that research in general?
So what we find is that about a third of donations are researched, and that about 19% of donors are research almost all the time. And so we have about a third of donations and a little less than that in terms of the actual number of donors that are researching on average. Most of with the exception of that one slide that broke out the 19% of core researchers and the 29% of occasional researchers, all the other data is presented in sort of percentage of grants or donations or recommendations, depending on the audience, donors, foundation grant makers, or advisors. But it's 33% of donations and slightly less than that in terms of percentage of donors that commonly research.
That's great.
So, Greg, that's not so surprising when you consider a donor is going to continue to give to their religious organization. They're going to continue to give to their alma mater. They're going to continue to give to maybe where their kids go to school or to a health organization that's had an impact on their family.
Right.
So if you take those off the table, it's the other parts of their life, right? It's a disaster. It's a special need that might come up or a special cause.
Yeah, exactly, and that's where we see that less than 20% of people are researching religious, donations to religious organizations, alma maters. And given that religious donations are a third, I believe the latest Giving USA at $95 billion given to religious organizations out of the $300 billion or so. So you have a huge chunk of the money that goes to charity going to religious organizations, and by the nature of those, they're researched a lot less often than our donations to other causes. And the thing I kid Bob about a little bit, the one area that we found that you can influence donors most directly is actually in disaster relief, because you have the opportunity for a trigger when someone should think about making a donation that you can act, and when those triggers are. And it's an area where people want to do the most good. They recognize they don't know exactly how to do so, and they're actually voicing a stated desire for information there more so than in other causes. So if you were, say, leading GuideStar for a long time and were making a career choice, then presumably moving into the world of disaster relief would be a really intelligent thing to do, obviously based on all this research.
Well, and that's a good segue into another question which we got. Of the individual donors that we analyzed in this research, how much was religious and church donations? And this person said, I can see how they would be low in terms of performing research, but they typically represent the largest portion of individual giving, from what I understand.
Yeah, that's a great question. So let me, I don't know the exact number and how our research relates to the total number that, or how our findings relate to the Giving USA overall off the top of my head on religious giving. So I know, again, about 35% of donations are to religious organizations, or 32%. I don't know if that's exactly what we found in our research. We did find, though, I mentioned earlier the segments of donors, and we found that the faith-based segment, so these are not all, so these people give primarily based on their religious affiliation and to support religious causes. That is a subset of all people, all money that goes to religious organizations. They're about a sixth of all donors. There's 16% of the population were motivated above all other things by sort of religious motivation. So 16% or 1/6 of donors, that was one of our segments of donors, are motivated primarily through faith-based means.
That's great. Another question is what the word advisor means. Does it mean financial planners and financial advisors who are asked to donate to nonprofits by their wealthy clients, or does it mean something else?
That's a good question. We spent a lot of time on this in focus groups to try to find what we wanted in advisors. What we wanted and what we screened for in our surveys was people that are professional advisors. So these could be specific philanthropic advisors, but they could also be financial planners, or they could be accountants. They could even be legal advisors potentially. But what we wanted to do is find people that were asked through their professional, in a professional manner, by their clients for advice on where to give money. And we found that donors ask a variety of their professional advisors because there isn't really a developed profession for philanthropic advisors that is really mainstream across the donation public, that a lot of people don't have access to those. But we wanted people that were not just helping people figure out how much to give for tax purposes, but understand where to give. So we actually had to survey many, many advisors, and we screened out the vast majority until we found 875, I believe, was the final tally, that advised people on where to make a charitable contribution. And again, they were financial advisors, they were tax advisors, they were philanthropic advisors, and others. We screened more on what they were advising on than their title itself.
Great. Okay, here's a specific question. As a small affiliate of Habitat in a small town, we build one home a year, but that impacts only one family at a time. So it's not a huge impact in terms of numbers. What can we focus on instead of numbers?
It's a good point. Well, and as a general point, impact isn't all about numbers. Impact is about the difference that you're making in the communities, the populations, the environments you serve. And charting impact, as Bob mentioned, was one of the tools that we found, and one of the reasons we recommend it is not only because we think it's a very useful tool from a management perspective for nonprofits, but also because the questions that it asks. What are you trying to achieve? How do you know you're going to do it? What's the impact of that, of what you're going to do? Are the types of questions donors want the answers to? And it was a format that people were looking for. People don't need numerical tables all the time. A story that talks to them about the impact you're having, that goes beyond just sort of how the money was spent, but how it transformed lives and how that met your mission and helped achieve what you're trying to do, and therefore what the donor was trying to do with their donation, is what people are looking for.
Yeah, and I would remind everyone that donors come to the giving process with different values and different priorities. And so what you need to do is sync up your organization with the right donors who are looking just for what you do. There's donors out there who are looking for local community organizations. They're not interested in national or international. They're looking for something in their neighborhood, and they may be looking for something that is very easy to understand and very easy to accomplish. And so they may not be looking for a big, sophisticated national program. So you just have to make sure that you're displaying your mission and your programs and the way you measure your success clearly and accurately, so that you can sync up with just the right donor mix.
That's great. Another question, how often should we thank our donors? What's an appropriate amount per year or month?
I don't know. I don't know the answer to that, other than to say you should thank them every time they give a donation at a minimum. But I don't have, and therefore I don't want to speculate with sort of without a fact base on the appropriate ways to thank them. But you should certainly thank them every time they give a donation, and then depending on your cause and what you're trying to do, how often you try to engage them beyond that, I think is a bit more case dependent.
And I'll answer that from a communications perspective. It really, I think, depends on the channel you're using, and I would use best practices for each channel. So if you're going to thank someone by email, I would look up how many times you should send an email. If you're going to do it snail mail, versus something else, I think that's usually how you can determine it. But I think the important part is when you say thanks, that you do point to that impact and that you've shown where that money has gone. I think that's really important. Bob, this is a good one for you. It says, what size nonprofit that is fundraising would benefit from utilizing a GuideStar profile?
Oh, I'd say any organization, big or small. In fact, you could make an argument that if you're a medium or a small organization, it's a great way to expand your capabilities to give you more outreach, more visibility, more promotion than you could normally fit into your budget. So think about it as, kind of a important outreach activity, but a free one, and a way for you to expand way beyond what you could do on your own.
That's great, thank you. Here's another good question. With something like greatnonprofits.org, how many nonprofits are assessed, and what determines greatness?
So it's a great question about great nonprofits. So great nonprofits. So I want to answer that first in the specific for great nonprofits, but then in the broad. So in the specific for great nonprofits is like Yelp for nonprofits. It is beneficiary and user reviews of nonprofits. It's a system that has the great benefit of getting the voice of the stakeholder and the beneficiary, which is incredibly useful if you're a nonprofit and you don't have great line of sight into those that you're serving. So you can get great feedback on the services you're providing, know how to adjust them. I mean, good beneficiary feedback and good mechanisms like that are somewhat of the holy grail for effective management and people understanding, are my programs having an impact? How can I improve them? So from a management perspective, it's very useful. It's also a sort of proxy for impact that donors can have to see if an organization is doing well. One of the challenges with an organization or an approach like Great Nonprofits is if there are only a few reviews, then you have issues of bias and scale involved. If there's, just if you look at book reviews, if there are 1,200 reviews of a book on Amazon, you have a good representative set. If there are 4, then it's likely that they're either people that bought the book and hated it or the author's mother, father, brother, and sister. And you can get bias ingrained here. So I think it's a useful management tool, and it's ultimately effective as a proxy for impact for donors, but recognize some of the challenges it has in its own methodology. But that points to a broader finding from the research and why very simple binary or star-based systems are tough for donors without context, which is why we, our first topics around collect around really talk about your impact, talk about things like charting impact. For better or worse, or for worse, there isn't a foolproof evaluation site at this point that really understands nonprofit impact and can provide all the information that one would want when evaluating if an organization is good or bad. Therefore, we have a variety of approaches. Great Nonprofits looks at stakeholders. Philanthropedia looks at quote-unquote experts like foundation officers and academics and others that have experience in the field. GiveWell basically tries to mimic the in-depth research one would try to do at a foundation and make that available for the public, focusing on a small number of very high-impact organizations. So what we find is there's a variety of approaches across the landscape. Donors recognize that they have their own biases, and these organizations probably have a bias. So just stating simply and starkly, this person thinks we're great, therefore we're great, isn't always the message donors are looking for. That's why they like the Consumer Reports format. That's why they want to hear a full story. So when you're using these third-party sites, we think showing their accolades, communicating what others are saying is effective, but recognize that it's a proxy for your impact. It's one piece of information that people want in context of the full picture. And until we have the perfect evaluation site, that there are pros and cons to these, both from their approach as well as for what donors are going to want to see from them.
Great. So we have time for one more question, then we'll wrap up, and that is, we are an arts organization, but we are 99% dependent on individual giving. How do we compete with humanitarian causes for donor dollars?
And Bob, I'll start off, and then if you want to chime in, that would be great. But I think it's similar to one of the questions we had earlier, or at least the answer to a question we had earlier, and that is, you know, we don't think you have to try to be something you're not. And donors are not driven by, you know, just giving to the organization that will save the most lives with the dollar that they can give. People are cause motivated first and foremost, and many people are attracted to arts organizations. So the key is talking about the impact you're having within the arts community, within the population you're serving, if there's an educational component or if it's for public benefit. Talk about what you're able to accomplish. Talk about the impact you're having as an organization, and people will find you out as a high-impact arts organization. And they're not going to be comparing you as much as one might think or potentially worry against humanitarian organizations, because people are driven cause first on a lot of their giving. Bob, do you have anything to add to that?
I think that was a great summary. I would just add that people have different values and priorities. We've actually, I think arts organizations have actually done pretty well the last few years in terms of overall giving. You just have to find the ones who are motivated to your cause, and then make sure that you're responding to what their needs and interests are.
Great. Thank you both so much. We really appreciate it. And to all of you on the phone, thanks so much for being with us. Our next webinar is on this Thursday at 1 p.m., and it'll give nonprofits tips for protecting themselves against IRS sanctions when it comes to setting executive compensation. And again, if we didn't get to your question today, please check back to our trust blog at trust.guidestar.org for additional answers. And again, you'll get an email with this presentation and the recording in a couple of days. Thanks so much, and I look forward to connecting with you on a future webinar. Take care.
Thank you, everyone.